BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Friday, another Cooper Friday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Fridays, I talk to you guys about D.B. Cooper, the man responsible for the only unsolved skyjacking in U.S. aviation history. And in this episode, I will be revisiting Fred Milton Lane as a D.B. Cooper suspect, looking at the book The Trail to D.B. Cooper, and of course continuing with the Cooper Profile segment, which is all about the psychological profiling of skyjackers. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about D.B. Cooper. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Black Box Ned. Now, longtime listeners to Cooper Friday might recognize the name Fred Milton Lane and ask, didn't you do an episode about him in the past? And the answer is yes. There was a book that came out about 7 months ago called The Trail to D.B. Cooper by James Lane, his son, and it explores the possibility of Fred Milton Lane being D.B. Cooper. I did one episode on it, and you can see The Trail to D.B. Cooper in the thumbnail, the cover for the book. But do you ever have those moments where a D.B. Cooper suspect just randomly pops into your mind, and you think, oh yeah, I remember that guy, or maybe you get the experience of, wait a second, I want to know more about that. And I decided to reread my copy of The Trail to D.B. Cooper because I really remember that Fred Milton Lane stood out to me as a D.B. Cooper suspect. And I really do have to put him in the category of somebody that I want to know more about. And believe it or not, I actually think that he is a plausible D.B. Cooper suspect. Is he one of my top-ranked D.B. Cooper suspects? I can't say that yet because I don't think we know enough about him. There is a book that's out about him that's about 45 pages long, and James Lane did an appearance on the Cooper Vortex. One of the shorter interviews on the Cooper Vortex. It's only about 35 minutes long, and I also listened back to that one as well. But I've always wanted to give Fred Milton Lane another chance because he's just been in the back of my mind for many months. So that's what brings us to the extended edition episode here today. And I also will provide the disclaimer that there is only one photo that was shared of Fred Milton Lane in the book, and you can't really see everything in a perfect full frontal, but you can also see some similarities to the D.B. Cooper composites, even though it isn't a perfect viewpoint for the photo. And that photo was taken approximately 5 or 6 months prior to the D.B. Cooper skyjacking. Fred Milton Lane has been accused of being D.B. Cooper by his sons, and I said this last week. Even if this is a case of my daddy was D.B. Cooper, I still approach these things with an open mind. And as I already said, I think that there are some strong points in favor of Fred Milton Lane being D.B. Cooper. He was 36 years old at the time of the skyjacking, which is a little bit on the younger side, but he did look considerably older. He was somebody who was an ex-Marine pilot and also ex-Coast Guard. And if you read The Trail to D.B. Cooper, it talks about him preparing for his jumps, and there's some recreations of his military stories that were, again, written by his son. They are not necessarily the first-hand experiences, but his son is recreating what he believed his father would have experienced when he was in the military preparing to do jumps, like to jump out of the airplane. So he has paratrooping experience, and also he spent 6 months on an icebreaker in the Arctic, circumnavigating the Arctic Ocean, and that is circumnavigating part of the world anyway. That's the way that it's described in the book. And there was actually a conversation between Fred Milton Lane and his daughter, wherein his daughter's like 5 or 6 years old, and she says, "Daddy, are you going to come back as a popsicle?" And I found that to be rather amusing. But in terms of being D.B. Cooper, I think some of the strong points that were put forward for Fred Milton Lane being a plausible suspect are that he is somebody who would have had a very clear grudge. When D.B. Cooper was on the plane, he demanded $200,000 and 4 parachutes, and he told one of the flight attendants, "I don't have a grudge against the airline, I just have a grudge." And there were 2 real reasons that were provided by James Lane as to why Fred Milton Lane may have been D.B. Cooper. And the first one is that he was somebody who was just short of getting his military pension, but because of an incident, an altercation, he was denied it. And he was about 6 years short of getting his full military pension and benefits, and because he was denied that, that could have been the clear grudge. But after his military career, he also sought the opportunity to be a commercial aviation pilot, and then he was denied that as well because of a couple reasons. One of them was the discharge issue, but also Fred Milton Lane was diagnosed with paranoid personality disorder. But in the book, The Trail to D.B. Cooper, he insists that it was an erroneous diagnosis. He was given that because he pissed off the wrong people. So this is a very clear reason as to why somebody would have wanted to commit the skyjacking. Fred Milton Lane was also somebody who had connections to Washington State and the Pacific Northwest, but also connections to Alaska, where he may have been more permanently based out of, specifically Bethel, Alaska. But his connections to the Pacific Northwest come from his grandparents, actually. His grandmother came from Finland and then moved to the Pacific Northwest, specifically in Woodlands, that's where his grandfather lived, and his father, Fred Milton Lane, kept a map of the area and also highlighted Woodlands, Washington. So even though this guy's from Alaska, he still would have had intimate familiarity with the Pacific Northwest, talking about southern Washington, northern Oregon, and the rivers. And when I was rereading the book, The Trail to D.B. Cooper, the actual getaway plan would have been D.B. Cooper's on the plane. He demands the $200,000 and 4 parachutes, and he decides to jump over southern Washington near the Lewis River. And he would have had a canoe stationed there. And he gets into the canoe on the Lewis River, and that's how he makes his getaway. Now, this is something very similar to one of my earlier beliefs about the Cooper case. If you go back and you listen to some of the earliest episodes of Cooper Friday, I was of the belief and mindset that D.B. Cooper jumped near the Lewis River and that he got into a boat. And I think the long and short of it is that I was heavily persuaded by a D.B. Cooper researcher named Bill Rollins, whose suspect is named Joe Lakich, because he provided some explanations in his YouTube videos that I found to be convincing. And I'm not sure the exact reasons why James Lane has proposed this, that Cooper would have escaped by canoe, but I think it's very interesting all the same. Now, I've done Cooper Friday for about 1.5 years here on Black Box Online Radio. And one more time, you guys can hit the like button and subscribe if you want to follow along with these discussions. But in that 1.5 years, I've totally taken a step back from this getaway on the Lewis River because I simply had to admit that there's insufficient evidence for me to support that. There could be countless other possibilities. One of them is that Cooper could have escaped with a different vehicle. Cooper could have escaped with an accomplice. Cooper could have landed, walked to civilization, used a payphone, and called said accomplice. Or maybe Cooper had a completely different plan that I'm not accounting for. But what do you think about that? If Cooper survived the jump, and I think the majority of listeners to Cooper Friday believe that Cooper survived the jump, but if Cooper survived the jump, what do you think his getaway plan was? That's the challenge question for this week. Please put your ideas in the comments section down below. So that's how Fred Milton Lane could have done that. 36 years old, and he is somebody who had a lot of aviation experience in the military. This would have been very easy for him. He had jumped out of a plane many times, paratrooping. And another thing that stood out to me on the Cooper Vortex when I was listening to James Lane talk about his suspect is that when he first analyzed the D.B. Cooper case, he was like many people and thinking, wait a second, this guy D.B. Cooper seems like he has an aviation background. Perhaps he was a pilot. And if he was a pilot, that's about 1% of the population. It also seems like he had everything else that we've said so far. Familiarity with the terrain, and also the type of grudge and reason why he would commit the skyjacking. So those pieces of information are also in place with Fred Milton Lane. But I think that there's another equally fascinating point that was raised by James Lane in his book, The Trail to D.B. Cooper, and he also talked about this on the Cooper Vortex, and that is that when D.B. Cooper obtained this money, $200,000, only $6,000 has been recovered at Tina Bar in Washington State, and that was found in 1980 by the Ingrams. So what happened to the rest of the money? In 1973, Fred Milton Lane made a very suspicious deposit of $21,000, and nobody seems to be able to account for it because at the time he was only earning $300 a week, and he made a suspicious deposit with this large amount of money that it didn't seem like he should have access to. And another thing that ties into the financial aspects of this is that he owned shares of a uranium mine. And this is something that James Lane even talked about when he went to collect his father's things or go through his father's affairs, and he found that he had a P.O. box in Alaska that was connected to several different things. And one of them was, through these investigations, he found out that his father owned 200 shares of a uranium mine, the Midnight Mines. And I was like, we might not think about Alaska and uranium immediately. The first thing you think about when you hear the name Alaska probably isn't uranium, but that's what James Lane claims that he has discovered. And uranium was one of the elements that was found on D.B. Cooper's tie. And this also shows that Fred Milton Lane would have been working with rare elements, or he would have known people who worked with rare elements, exposures to rare elements and metals. And when D.B. Cooper jumped, he left behind his clip-on tie on the plane, which also had rare elements and metals, one of which was uranium. There's also thorium on the tie, and of course, most famously, pure titanium. So there are explanations that have been provided. Now, one of the things that is a little bit more speculative is that when Fred Milton Lane would have committed the skyjacking, allegedly, he may have used an excuse of going on an elk hunt. Because one thing that James Lane learned is that around this uranium mine, or just in the vicinity in this part of Alaska, there was lots of elk hunting, and Fred Milton Lane was somebody who was known to do similar activities, according to his research and the family stories. So he could have provided the explanation to his family that he was going on an elk hunt for that day in Thanksgiving, when in reality he's going down to Portland, getting on a flight, going up north to Washington State, obtaining the $200,000 in 4 parachutes, jumps out to the Lewis River, gets in a strategically placed canoe, and then he gets away with it. And I know a lot of people are very skeptical of these "my daddy did it" suspects. I was even talking about this last week on the channel when I proposed Daniel Waltoner as a D.B. Cooper suspect. And he has been accused of being D.B. Cooper by his daughter, Sophie Danielle, but I definitely would put Fred Milton Lane as a higher-ranking suspect than Daniel Waltoner, and he's also older, which is surprising because when you think of a 36-year-old D.B. Cooper suspect, he should be somebody who is thought of as a younger one, on the younger side, but Daniel Waltoner was 30 years old. He was born in France, in Paris, France, actually. He had a hard French accent, reportedly. And I'm not seeing any of those issues with somebody such as Fred Milton Lane. If anything, I'm hearing explanations, and I'm hearing a lot of the bases being covered. So I think that I'm just in the category of, I want to know more about him. I want to know why he committed the skyjacking. I want to know how things went down. I want to hear more aspects of the theory, and I also want to know more details about the life of Fred Milton Lane, because we can speculate day in and day out. We can theorize and hypothesize until the cows come home, but in all seriousness, I would just really like to find out more about his whereabouts, more about things that might be able to eliminate him, things that would be able to include him. And I mean, I would also just like to see more photos, because I know we have this photo of him cutting a wedding cake, but we can't necessarily see too much about that. And he was reported to be 5 feet 10 inches tall, to have had hazel eyes, and D.B. Cooper was reported to have had possibly brown eyes. But the only flight attendant who saw D.B. Cooper without his sunglasses on was Florence Schaffner, and a lot of people look to one line, then the reports that says, maybe brown eyes. So people think that they aren't completely certain about D.B. Cooper's eye color, but I'm going to be very honest with you. It's going to be much easier to mistake hazel eyes for brown than, let's say, bright blue eyes for brown. So suspects with blue eyes always have that giant question mark. And I mean, also, let's also be clear, some people with green eyes don't have extremely bright green eyes. I mean, I even heard someone talk about this, that he had extremely green eyes, so that often becomes the focus of conversations when he's at social gatherings, and he just anticipates it because he had very bright green eyes. A lot of people have darker shades of green, and that can even be mistaken for brown. So brown, hazel, green, and also the people who have all types of colors in their eyes. You know exactly what I'm talking about if you've ever met somebody who has that type of description. But I think that one of the reasons why I'm so curious about this one is I could tell that James Lane has really tried to provide explanations as to how and why these things would have happened. There is a reason why the skyjacking occurred. There is the grudge, what he did with the money. I mean, I just told you he put most of it into buying shares into the mines, or that perhaps he deposited some, he spent other things. He may have purchased a plane, and then he put $21,000 in the bank in 1973. And the mine actually went out of business. So even though he had the 200 shares of the mine, because it went out of business, his son was not able to come to collect any money or anything. I mean, 200 times zero is still zero, right? So there are just all of these things that have been put in place. And I mean, something like the elk hunting angle, that I can't necessarily accept too easily, because one thing that I'm perhaps misunderstood was that in the first episode that I did on Fred Milton Lane as a D.B. Cooper suspect, I thought that the explanation was that he told his family that he was going elk hunting in the Pacific Northwest in Oregon or Washington State, but in reality, it seems like this is something that James Lane would have hypothesized by himself, that he told his family that he was elk hunting in Alaska, and he actually used that as a cover story so he could go down to Portland. I guess he would have had to have gone to Washington State first, stationed the canoe at a place over the Lewis River, and just simply estimated the amount of time that it would take to go from Washington and Seattle to the Lewis River, and then he could have jumped over that and used the canoe to get to a desired location, then take the money back to Alaska, and the rest would be history. But I would like to turn it over to you guys and just really ask, what do you think about Fred Milton Lane as a D.B. Cooper suspect? What do you think about everything that has been shared so far? Do these points make sense to you? And do you think that this is a suspect that is completely off point? Is 36 years old too young to have been D.B. Cooper? Now, last week, I know I was talking about this recently. I said that if we're going to entertain suspects such as Richard McCoy and Robert Rackstraw, who are in their 20s, proposing a suspect in their 30s should not be a deal breaker. I mean, I'm going to say, though, it's a problem for me. I think that Cooper was older. I think that Cooper was considerably older than 36, but for some reason, Fred Milton Lane stands out to me, and he seems like somebody who may have been able to overcome that age gap. But no, 36 is not a deal breaker. It's just I have doubts about D.B. Cooper being that young. I want to know what you think. Put your idea in the comment section down below. Now, I will also give you a warning. If you choose to read this book, The Trail to D.B. Cooper, it's very short. It's about 44 pages long, and it also tells the story of someone who was in the military, all of his military experiences. It's really not until about 3/4 of the way through the book where things start to get into the hard world of D.B. Cooper. It's like 75% of it is backstory with a few D.B. Cooper words that have been peppered in, if you will. But then a lot of the things are not D.B. Cooper related, and I was talking about this yesterday on Dahlia Thursday. Every Thursday I talk about the Black Dahlia here on Black Box Online Radio. If I'm looking for specific pieces of information, that's what I'm focused on. Like, I know somebody has written a book, and they're trying to tell a story, but if I'm looking to see if this person was D.B. Cooper, sometimes my focus just goes to the Cooper parts, and that's another reason why I wanted to give the book a second read, because last time, when I did this the first time, I'm pretty much just breezed right through the military sections. And I'm like, I want to get to the parts about D.B. Cooper, and I spent some more time with it this time, and that's how I got the story of him spending 6 months in the Arctic on the icebreaker, and that would have been when he was with the Coast Guard. But as far as his personality, I mean, paranoid personality disorder, erroneous diagnosis, you can also let me know how that factors in. And please just share anything you want about Fred Milton Lane in the comment section down below. And right now, I would like to shift gears and move to the Cooper Profile segment here on Cooper Friday, which is going to talk all about the psychological profiling of skyjackers. And again, there's another very short section in Dr. David G. Hubbard's book. Last time I was talking about another short section. It's like he did his big sections first, and now the end of the book really has some shorter ones. And this is the story of Sven, a skyjacker from Europe. And somebody asked me the question of, are the skyjackers that are talked about in the book written by Dr. David G. Hubbard ones that are of D.B. Cooper's age? And what I said last week is, most of them, if not all of them, do not have their ages listed. But with somebody like Sven, he was specifically referred to as middle-aged, which I could only gather to be maybe around his late 30s, early 40s. Again, the ages are not listed in the book, but Sven was somebody who had an aviation background. He got arrested multiple times for flying across international borders without a license or without the right to do so. Gets 2 years in prison here, 3 years in prison there, and then Sven would go on to become a skyjacker who's trying to get to Cuba. And then one of the reasons for this is his life fell apart. He was somebody who lost his child. His child was taken away from him because he did not have the financial means to provide. So that's a type of grudge. And this is a big commonality that we have seen in the Cooper Profile segment, that the skyjackers really seem to have something that is driving them to commit these things. It's not done only for the thrill. It's not just, hey, this would be a cool idea. Or it's not just, hey, I think I know how to earn some money. Maybe the film The Pursuit of D.B. Cooper from 1981 would present things like that. But the majority of cases that I've talked about on Cooper Friday in this segment are people who have had some very, very intense tragedies in their life, problems, or as I just said, Sven lost a child, and the exact relation is not clear. It says the child that he was taking care of. I'm not sure if that was his biological child or if it was just a guardianship issue or a stepchild or something like that, but he lost custody because he was unable to provide. So there are these types of family issues, family disputes, and we've been asking the question for a very long time, was D.B. Cooper married? I tend to think that D.B. Cooper was married at some point, and it's not only because of his age. I tend to think that D.B. Cooper was married because that would provide a reason why he would choose to do something like commit the skyjacking, where his marriage fell apart, maybe he got divorced, maybe he lost custody of his children if he had them, maybe he was separated, maybe his wife left him for somebody else, maybe there was just some type of problem that drove D.B. Cooper to commit the skyjacking. Maybe he was just so bothered and infuriated by the circumstances that he's like, you know what? I'm going to do this. And then all of the typical psychological reasons, it's a form of an escape. Because that's another thing that Sven was very clear about, the European skyjacker, and they didn't say exactly which country he was from. I'm guessing maybe Norway, Sweden, maybe somewhere in the Nordic world with a name like Sven, but I'm not 100% sure. And, I think this is done for patient confidentiality, but a lot of the backstories of the patients are not provided in the Skyjacker. He's simply referred to as Sven, who was a European Skyjacker who wanted to go to Cuba. And the next part of it is maybe that he was just experiencing something where he wanted to get away. He stated very clearly that this was an escape, that the reason why he committed the skyjacking was he's trying to escape from the abject poverty and the failures and the misery of his life. And Dr. David G. Hubbard is somewhat critical of that, but at the same time, he's also just trying to document these findings. So that's why I have a big problem when some people are saying that they think that D.B. Cooper did this just for fun, or like in the Barb Dayton theory, where it wasn't done for the money, it was done for the thrill of it, it was done because of a revenge plot where Barb Dayton was not able to become a commercial aviation pilot, and I don't particularly like that. Instead, I would also like to know, just more about each suspect and what would be the tragedy that they experienced in life. And with somebody like Fred Milton Lane, that would also be very good to know. I mean, he's cheated out of his military pension, and also, I mean, he would be he was cheated out of becoming a commercial aviation pilot, just like Barb Dayton. I don't know if cheated is the right word for either one of them. They were denied this possible career, so I don't necessarily know if that's a sufficient explanation as to why somebody would commit a skyjacking. Now, if you're just talking about obtaining the money, sure, but somebody like Fred Milton Lane at age 36 may have felt very bad about that, but he seemed like some guy who was a little bit more opportunistic. These might be strikes against him that aren't psychological factors. They're showing that he is a perfect D.B. Cooper suspect. Let me know what you think. Put your ideas in the comments section down below. And overall, I think he's an interesting suspect. I mean, I really want to know more about him. And one of the things that James Lane was talking about on the Cooper Vortex was maybe he would write a second follow-up book about Fred Milton Lane. I would love to just read that, hear more about him, because a lot of us really want the truth in the D.B. Cooper case. And I think that maybe he had a hard life. Maybe he was very upset about certain things, but I'm not necessarily sure if he had the exact psychological factors that I'm reading about in the Skyjacker that would have driven him to commit the skyjacking. But I will gladly accept the result. And something else with Fred Milton Lane, we really just need to know whereabouts, we need to know more about his physical descriptions, and I'm just going to keep an open mind. But let me know what you think. Please put your ideas in the comment section down below. What do you think about Fred Milton Lane as a D.B. Cooper suspect? What do you think about any of the other suspects that I've mentioned? Barb Dayton, Joe Lakich, and I'm also seeing some similarities between Fred Milton Lane and Ted Braden about being 5 feet 10 inches tall with hazel eyes. Ted Braden may have been an inch shorter, also with some reasonably green eyes, but Ted Braden, of course, was much more of a badass than Fred Milton Lane. Just saying, and I don't think that's a controversial statement. But please let me know what you think about the D.B. Cooper suspects. And if you think that this guy is absolutely not Cooper, put your idea in the comment section down below. Why not? I would love to read that. And I also want to remind you guys that this show comes to you Monday through Friday here on Black Box Online Radio, talking about unsolved mysteries. Every Monday is Zodiac Monday, where I talk about the Zodiac Killer. On Tuesdays, I've been talking about the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. On Wednesdays, about Jack the Ripper. And on Thursdays, about the Black Dahlia. You're listening to Cooper Friday right now. So if you have any ideas for future episodes, you can put them in the comments section down below. I also release shorts and reels Monday through Friday here on Black Box Online Radio, and also on Facebook and Instagram. My Facebook name is Ned DeHaan, and my Instagram name is blackboxned88. And if you want to support any of these efforts, you can go over to buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout-out on Zodiac Monday. And this show is available for free downloads anywhere you get your podcasts under the names Black Box True Crime or Black Box Podcast, and the images for this program are archived at True Crime Designs on Facebook. That's all for me now, but please, let me know what you think about Fred Milton Lane as a D.B. Cooper suspect, and I will see you guys on Monday for an episode about the Zodiac Killer. Everybody have a wonderful weekend. Until next time.